I think every writer or person who writes at some point, wants to write a book. But my process was different because I never had the reason to write a book. I had things that I had written. It just wasn't this impulse. And I didn't really know how to start. Again, I was still operating under the auspice that this was a magical thing and magicians did it. And it's not something that was accessible to everyone.
Turns out Bassey is a magician, and she wrote one of my all-time favorite books. In this episode, she shares how it started out as a completely different book, but working on it in the midst of a mental health crisis actually led her down a more authentic path.
But as far as like the emotions in it, those were as accurate as they could possibly be without having to actually get in a DeLorean and travel back in time and experience them
get your
again.
Own hospital bracelet.
Exactly. But that story too, I also wanted people to, when they read the book, I didn't want anybody to read it and then walk away and be like, I still don't get it. I still don't understand, anxiety. I still don't get depression and mania. What's that? Like, I wanted you to be just as exhausted as I was. I wanted you to feel just as rushed. Like, some of the stories had really, really long sentences, like maybe 40 words in a sentence, because that's what mania feels like.
Bassey talks about emotional accuracy versus chronological accuracy, plus how she found her agent, the importance of a good editor, and more in today's episode.
There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books.
Hi, my name is Bassey Ikpi, and I wrote I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying.
I freaking loved your book so much. Honestly, one of my favorite books I've ever read.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
Wow.
It was so beautiful, even especially the hard parts. And I was just felt like I was like right there with you. And I just wanted to give your narrator, like you, a hug. So I just wanted to say that to start with.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So let's start out with, I do the same 5 questions to kind of warm up with everyone. So when did you first identify as a writer?
I first identified as a writer 4 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that other people said I was a writer. And so I said, okay. But I started reading and speaking English around the same time when I was about 4 or 5. And writers were so magical to me. Like, I didn't understand how somebody who was born 100 years before my parents was able to write about a little girl. I'm talking about Anna Green Gables, that felt like me and did the same things that I did and felt the same ways that I felt. So it just felt like magic to me. It didn't feel like something attainable. Even when I started writing, I just didn't think that I was doing that. I didn't feel like I was doing that. And it wasn't until the first kind of draft of my book that people started reading, and the reaction you gave me, which is, I felt that. I was like, oh, I did the magic.
Yay. Yes.
Yeah.
You totally did the magic. So I'm just curious, like, how did you perceive what you were doing when you were, because you started as a poet and you've been doing that a long time, right?
Yeah, I was just writing. And for me, when it came to poetry, it was more the performance that I attached to. And I just so happened to be good at writing. And here's another thing. I felt like writers worked. I felt like they got up in the morning, they, had their coffee, they sat at their desk and they wrote, and I didn't do that. I would, be on the bus, or I'd be in the middle of class, or I'd literally wake up from sleep and like grab something and write. So it didn't feel like a discipline. It didn't feel disciplined, so I didn't feel like I was doing that.
Okay, what's your all-time favorite book?
This took a minute, but I think it is Some Love, Some Pain, Sometime by J. California Cooper.
What is this book about?
J. California Cooper is the reason I write the way that I write. She wrote mainly short stories, but she wrote in these like really short sentences. And it taught me as a poet and as a, writer, that the economy of words is really, really powerful. The words that you choose to use and the words you choose not to use are equally as powerful in the sentences that you write. And it's a collection of short stories about some love, some pain, some time. Like it was just beautiful. And
What era are we talking?
it runs the gamut. It's about Black life from like the 30s, 40s, 50s. She passed away about a decade ago, and I had the absolute pleasure of meeting her like a year before she passed away. So she's much older. So in my mind, and it's not really a competition. It's but Toni Morrison and her, they were in the same time period. And Toni Morrison like creates these landscapes and paints these entire worlds. And J. California Cooper focuses on a corner and does so much in that corner. And because of, things that I found out later, ADHD and, anxiety and depression and mania, I get fixated on corners as well. And so learning how to write, I don't know where I got this metaphor of a corner. It's like literally the first time I've ever said it right now. But like she just focuses on the corner and does everything she can to show you not only what you're looking at, but the absence of the space is also part of the story. And she taught me that. And all her work, but specifically Some Love, Some Pain, Sometime, those collection of stories have always just stuck with me.
Oh, that's so interesting. I actually have a question about this later. We'll talk about it in a second. What's your dream writing routine?
My dream writing routine is I want to get up in the morning. I don't drink coffee, but I want to start and I want to sit at a desk and write something from beginning to end, and then, be very happy with the editing process and to sit and edit and send it to an editor and have them give me notes and me not cry and throw up when I get them. And I want it to be a practice. I want it to be a practice. I want it to be a discipline. I don't think my mind works like that, but I would love for that to be, I'm just going to this cafe and I'm just going to sit here for 12 hours and write the entire time, not me being there for 12 hours and I'm looking around and I'm listening to people and I'm, shuffling through things. I like to listen to music while I'm thinking, but as soon as the writing part starts, I have to turn it off. Because I'm too easily distracted, or I can't hear myself with the music. So I have to press pause, write what I need to write.
Yeah, especially if it has lyrics. Okay, on that note.
Oh my God, yes.
What is your real writing routine?
My real writing routine is I don't have one. It just comes when it comes. Since I wrote my book, and I guess we'll get into this when we go in, but since I wrote my book, I have fallen out of love with writing. And now it is something that I am trying to get back, but it's very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. But I do, have the moments where something pops in my head and, back in the day, it would be napkins and, envelopes. Now it's my notes app on my phone. But I tend to collect a bunch of thoughts. And then because I'm constantly thinking, and somebody actually validated this idea that you're always writing. Mm-hmm. You're not always, writing it down, but you're always writing, and those collections of experiences and time, and even sitting in a cafe and listening to conversation that helps you build, the way that people talk in real life. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, so I collect things, and then one day I'll look at all the things and I'll start writing. I'd say everything that I write takes like an hour, but that's just because I've been thinking for 2 years.
Right. Okay, one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it.
Oh, Moonlight, the movie Moonlight. I read the screenplay, and it is an epic poem. It is
Really?
gorgeous. It is a poem. Everything about it from beginning to end, it did not feel like a movie. I loved the movie, and I thought the movie was very poetic. But when I read the screenplay, I was immediately like, I don't know if I'm capable, but I'm really, really jealous that I did not write this.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to read that.
It was so good.
Okay. So let's dig into the book, set it up for everybody with the title and the premise and just like your basic elevator pitch.
Oh God, elevator pitch.
Not to use such gross language.
My book is called I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying. And it is a collection of nonfiction short stories about discovering the way my brain works. Is that good? Is that a good elevator pitch?
That's totally good. Okay, so I am so curious to hear about the whole process. I just want you to start like at the beginning. When did you get the inkling from being a poet that like, okay, I want to write a book?
I think every writer or person who writes at some point, wants to write a book. But my process was different because I never had the reason to write a book. I had things that I had written. It just wasn't this impulse. And I didn't really know how to start. Again, I was still operating under the auspice that this was a magical thing and magicians did it. And it's not something that was accessible to everyone. But in 2015, I had realized that I'd been in a very slow, depressive episode for, I want to say, about a decade. And I would go up and down again because, bipolar 2 disorder. But for the most part, there was a depression that just sort of bubbled underneath the surface for a few years. And in 2015, it came to the surface. And I was having a very, very difficult time. And I was fairly certain that I wasn't going to make it out of it this time. And I started thinking, well, I want something tangible to exist if I don't exist anymore.
Oh.
But I started writing a different book. The book that I started writing is not the book I ended up with. The book I started writing was oddly this self-help type of, it had a different title. It was called Making Friends with Giants. And it was this like, you can live with bipolar 2 disorder. And these are all the things that I did while I was, just it was a lie. It was a book full of lies that I was starting to write, but I was also struggling to write it because it was a book full of lies. And at the same time, I was struggling to write that book. I was writing these letters and notes and stories to my friends and my family, telling them and showing them all of the things that I'd been through. And like a testimony, like I did the best I could. These are all the things that you don't know about. That time when I didn't show up at your bridal shower, I was in the hospital. And the time that, just telling people all of these things that I hadn't really told them before, because I wanted them to understand and I wanted them to feel like she did the best she could. That was a lot that she went through. But in the process of writing that, I was also able to look at it as I went through these things that I was telling my friends about, but I also got out of those things. This is going to be very corny, but every valley that I was writing about, I had a series of valleys because I would climb out, do a bunch of really cool things, and inevitably go back. But I would climb out of that, do something else that was really cool. And I started to look at my life not as a collection of failures, but as a collection of redos and starts and restarts. And that helped me understand that the story that I actually wanted to tell about my life was a story that I wanted people to know about people like me. So it became a mirror for myself and people who could intimately understand some of the things that I was writing about. But I also wanted it to be a window for people who were looking from the outside in, trying to figure out what their mom or their brother or their ex-husband or their coworker that gets on their nerves, or all these different people, the lives that they live in the quiet times when you don't see them, and how that informed how they are when they intersect with your lives, which is why the stories of other people that I told in the book, I chose very specifically because of how they intersected with my life at the time that I met them, or I knew them, or I was writing about them. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, okay. So I have some follow-ups.
Sure.
So when did the theme emerge, like I'm telling the truth, but I'm lying?
It's odd because when I was writing, I started working on there's an essay in the book called Like a War. And that was the first thing that I wrote that was different than the other book that I was writing, because I was having a difficult time telling the truth, because I was so used to lying. I was so used to telling the other version of things, the better version of things,
Right.
the edited version of things. And no matter how hard I tried, I would just slip right back into the lie. And so I remember I was in a cafe in Brooklyn, and I said, write it like you're watching it. Write it like somebody else is looking at you do these things, and see how honest you can be while you're doing that. And then, later on, you can go back and change the pronouns back to I and me. But I realized that writing it the way that I experienced it, some of the things that I was writing about, I wrote in like a very dissociative way, because I was dissociative when I was going through it. And it was easier for me to look back on it and remember and say, oh, this is what I was thinking, or this was what was going on, and I wasn't aware at the time. So it gave me a way to shift the perspective in ways that felt very authentic to the experience, in ways that would be impossible to do had I written a straight narrative and tried to write I's and me's and we's and us. I had to give myself permission, and thank God, my editor, Erin, she's the one who said to me, because in these different essays that I was writing, I had versions of I'm telling the truth, but I'm lying. She's telling the truth, but she's lying. He's telling the truth, but he's lying. And it was in these different essays that it would just pop up. And she pointed out, you say this every time you want to believe something that either isn't true or is too true. And you just sort of insert it. And of course, when we were working out the other book and going into this one, she said, let's just use it as a placeholder. And then after a certain point, it just became the title. And of course, we had to go back and remove it from all of the essays that appeared in, except for one where I think it made the most sense to keep.
But there are glimmers throughout. You feel like that narrative is, even though you get to explore and you do all these different things and play with format and whatever, that is so cohesive.
And I can't take credit for it because I don't know how it happened. And I'm very honest about that. That's why I was telling you, I was like, I don't have a good process. Things just feel like it happens. And of course, you're thinking about things for a long time. And I was definitely ready to write the book when I wrote the book. And I think that it became decades worth of experiences and stories that I had told myself, and collections of memories that I had and collections of memories that I didn't have, that I've always thought about. And so it came out in a way that felt like it was the right time for it to come out. I couldn't have written this book 10 years ago. I couldn't have written this book a year ago. It had to be the moment that it was written.
Okay, so the corners thing is so interesting that you brought that up, because you do the most with, it'll be like something you say you can barely remember, but you're giving a whole meal with it. You know what I mean? It's so vivid. So I was going to ask you, where that came from and how you do that, but you sort of said you were inspired by
J. California Cooper.
J. California. Yeah.
But also and another reason why I didn't think I could ever write a book is because I don't have a good memory. And I know that's funny to say because I have such distinct memories, but I have an emotional memory.
You do.
I remember how things felt. And because I can remember how they felt, I can retrace what happened, but it's always still from my perspective. The fifth grade class that I thought was my third grade class, because my anxiety, what I know now to be anxiety, started in the third grade. But what I remember to be the catalyst for the anxiety I know now happened in the fifth grade. And I spent a lot of time saying, should I go and fix the dates? And then I realized that the dates didn't matter. We tend to put so much emphasis on chronological memory. Somehow, if I say that it hurt when I fell and skinned my knee in the fourth grade, and somebody said, oh, well, it was actually the sixth grade. Does it make my knee hurt any less? Does
right.
it make the memory, the feeling, the fear, the pain, the whatever I felt, does that make it any less important that I felt it? Or is it more important that I got the date right? And I think that we often feel like we need to choose one or the other. And I also am very aware that the things that I was writing about, my sister and my brothers were right there with me, but I'm 6, 8, and 10 years older than them. So the way that I experienced my family, my parents, our parents, is different than the way that they did. Doesn't make their memories any less true. It means that my parents were different people in all these different stages, and I'm a different person in all those different stages. And I had to honor the fact that my memory and the way that I focused on certain details, like remembering the way things smelled. Like I may not remember when I met you, but I can remember what you were wearing, because those are the things that imprint in my mind. And the book was just filled with things that imprinted in my mind to the best of my ability. And once I was given permission to have a memory like that and have it still be considered a truth, it opened a lot of space for me to tell the story that I needed to.
Well, I guess let's talk about the people, since you just mentioned it. So there are several like distinctive characters throughout the book, and like your mom, your sister, the therapist, etc. Did you tell those people they were going to be in the book? No.
I did not. My parents, I told not to read the book, and they said, okay. My sister made a decision not to read the book because what I just said, which is we have different experiences and different memories. And she's like, it's not my memory. And I want you to feel like you can tell it, and not feel what I was feeling, which is I needed to protect everything and everybody. And that started to feel like I needed to tell a lie. And I didn't want to do that. The only person that knew that they were in the book and insisted that I keep their name was Derek, because Derek was like, please immortalize me. He's hilarious. So he's the only one who knew, who I know, to my knowledge, has read the book and approved of his edit. But everyone else, I didn't want it to be about that. And one of my regrets is that I didn't do a good enough job in my quest to protect other people's stories, where I didn't want to say, well, his father also had bipolar disorder, so it informed the way that he behaved, and his mother left when she, I didn't want to do all of that because those aren't my stories. I only wanted to tell up until they intersected with my specific mental health journey. And my main regret is that I didn't illustrate enough how much they meant to me and how much I did care for them and the things that they did do that made me feel loved, or why I was with them or around them, or why I cared for them in the first place.
Okay, but you did in the acknowledgments.
Did I?
You did in the book, and then your acknowledgments. I was like so impressed. I was like, this is like 5 to 10 pages of acknowledgments. Everyone is getting a full graph.
There's a lot of people that went into making sure that I existed, and I had to thank them for it. If I had no other chance.
I loved it. And I was crying during the acknowledgments like it was one of the essays.
Aw.
So yeah, I guess going back to that, how you're writing memories that, are hard to remember or faded or got fucked up in the saving or whatever. Do you have any tips for excavating some of that?
Um,
Or just trust your gut?
I think that's what it is. I think that giving yourself permission to access them in the first place, because I think that we are often told that the bad memories or the not so pleasant memories need to be buried, or the bad memories need to be exposed. And I think exposing and remembering or honoring are different things, because there's no editorial slant on just existing in your memory. As much as I could, I tried not to give myself a perfect edit. There were no villains in the book. There were no villains. There were a few heroes. I think Dr. Goodman, Dr. Tiago, Derek were probably the heroes, but I wasn't a hero in this story. I did some really not great things to people that I cared about, but I didn't want it to be about that either. And when people say tell the truth, it also means be good to yourself and to be good to the people and edit with kindness. I think that's the main thing. I think tell the truth as big and bold and excruciating as possible, but then edit yourself and the people and the story with a kind eye. That was something that kept resurfacing.
Yeah.
Just be kind. Even if it hurts, even if it's hurtful, be kind. Don't be vengeful, or this wasn't a revenge story where everybody who's ever wronged me. It wasn't that. I wanted to be as kind as possible to the story and to the memories.
Yeah, I love that too, of that line of like, this is my story and this is their story. Because it is tempting to explain like why someone might react like they did or whatever.
Yeah.
How far after you were hospitalized and stuff were you able to start working, and how did your writing intersect with like, any of those struggles? Like, were there times you couldn't write?
Yeah. Especially during the process of figuring out what medications worked, that was difficult because I was also learning that so much of what I thought was my personality were symptomatic of this illness that I had, or this thing that I was diagnosed with. So I had to do a lot of figuring out who I was. And I honestly did not figure that out until a couple of years ago. There was a lot of relearning, unlearning, and learning that I had to do. I was also always a note taker. One of the stories in the book, the one that's broken down into like minute by minute, hour by hour, I wrote that. In the end of that story, I'm at the airport and I'm getting on a plane and I'm flying to, I think I was going to Detroit. I wrote it on the plane. I wrote the bulk of it on the plane because that was the moment I realized, oh, there's something wrong with you. There's something not okay. And I want you to, me. I'd always written to understand myself and others. I used to write my parents letters and slip it under their door when something happened, or if I thought that they were being unfair, or if I hadn't explained something well enough, I wanted to explain, and I wanted to get it all out without being interrupted. And that's actually where I started writing. Now that I'm thinking about it, that unlocks something. But I felt like I need to document this, not because I knew 20 years from now I'm going to write a book and it's going to be in there, but because I felt every second so excruciatingly detailed that it had to mean something. And I didn't know what, but it had to mean something. And I started writing it there. And that's the story in the book that was written during that time. And I also had, like, before they were called blogs, I had an online journal that I wrote all these things in too, because I knew something was wrong. And I wanted it to be documented, not for other people, just because I feel like I'm in therapy, but also I was always afraid that I was going to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
In very colloquial terms, I was going to lose it. I was going to wake up one day and I wouldn't know who I was, and I wouldn't know why, and I wouldn't be able to understand, and I wanted to write it down for those reasons. And I honestly have never thought about that until right this second, right now.
That's so interesting, because I was going to ask like how you reconstructed that, because it is like down to the minute.
Yeah. Yeah. It was on the plane. And then also, it's writing. So there were gaps that I needed to fill. But I always, and this is what I point out, the emotional accuracy of the book is, I was going to say spot on. I don't know what that means. 100%. I don't know.
It is spot on.
But the emotional accuracy, I will not, if I could go back and edit anything, it would be some of the things I said before, or there's a story that I would take out, or there's another story that I should have put in there. But as far as like the emotions in it, those were as accurate as they could possibly be without having to actually get in a DeLorean and travel back in time and experience them
get your
again.
own hospital bracelet.
Exactly. But that story too, I also wanted people to, when they read the book, I didn't want anybody to read it and then walk away and be like, I still don't get it. I still don't understand, anxiety. I still don't get depression and mania. What's that? Like, I wanted you to be just as exhausted as I was. I wanted you to feel just as rushed. Like, some of the stories had really, really long sentences, like maybe 40 words in a sentence, because that's what mania feels like. I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure, and I am sure now, if I was ever going to write another book. And I wanted to make sure that this was the book. This had all the things in it. I didn't want to go back and I should have said, and I fought for so much. I fought for the cover. I fought for the title. I fought for that essay. They wanted to cut it in half, and I said it's either all in there or none of it goes in there, because when they said, well, it's just so long and by the middle we're exhausted, I was like, good, me too. Me too. I was also very exhausted when that was happening. But I fought for what I wanted in it, because I didn't know if I'd ever get another chance to tell this specific story, and I wanted to get it as right as I possibly could.
Okay, so moving into the publishing process, like, when did you get an agent and how did you find your publisher, et cetera?
So, as I stated before, I was going through the worst depressive episode of my life, 2015, 2016. And you're not going to believe this, but it is true. I decided that if the last thing I was going to do was write a book, then I was going to write it. I got on Facebook, and I had a status, and I said, somebody teach me how to write a book proposal. And by that, I mean somebody write a book proposal for me. And a friend of mine was in the comments, was like, oh, my friend is an agent. Do you want me to introduce you? And I'm like, sure. And I've had agents before, but like I said, I was never ready to write a book, an honest book, a true book, and the contracts would lapse. And he sent me an email that same night. He happened to be on the West Coast for a work trip, so he was up late. It was like 3 a.m. It was pretty weird. And the next day, we hopped on the phone and spoke, and signed me a few days later. Everything about my career, from spoken word and Def Poetry Jam days, moving to Brooklyn, all that stuff happened in this kind of same way, which for a long time I felt meant that I wasn't really good at what I did, because it just all felt accidental. It felt like I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. If I didn't come here this day, it wouldn't have happened. It's not like I worked really hard for it. It's not like I was writing letters and getting a bunch of rejections, or going on auditions and not getting the part. It was all just tripping and falling into things. And it made it difficult that when things stopped happening, I didn't know how to get it back, because, and it made me feel like I hadn't really earned it. So all of this was happening at the same time during this depressive episode. My career was pretty much done as far as poetry was, because I realized I hated performing. The healthier I got, as far as like figuring out what my symptoms were and what my personality was, it was like, I don't like performing. There's no reason to have an anxiety attack immediately before and immediately after doing something.
Right.
If you have to do that, then stop doing that thing. Like, stop doing it. Like, there's just no reason for it. Like, if I was a neurosurgeon and I had a panic attack before every brain operation, I would stop. Like,
Yeah.
I would quit doing it. It's not safe for me. It's not safe for the person I'm operating on. Let's not do it anymore. So that happened, and we got a couple of offers. It was weird because it was the book that we sold was such a nothing concept book. It was nothing, and it would have been something if I was like a Kardashian, where you're selling your name, and so the book could be about whatever.
Right.
There was no. I'm very shocked that anybody wanted to buy it, because I looked at the proposal and I was like, this is terrible. Like, what was I even trying to say? What was I trying to say? But we got an offer really quickly. But it was right when Insecure had just premiered. Issa Rae was like getting really, really big. There's a woman named Lovey whose book was also out, had just come out, and they wanted to capitalize on that Black girl magic type thing. And so they wanted the book. I think that we had the meeting in April, and they wanted the book by like July, like a 3-4 month turnaround. And it wasn't enough money to make it feasible. But then also, I didn't want like 4 months to write a book because you're trying to capitalize on a trend. I didn't want that either. And we had maybe 2 more offers that just didn't feel right. When I spoke to the editors, I think that in my heart, corny, in my spirit, I don't know, but deep down, I knew that there was another book there, and I was trying to sell this one that I didn't really believe in.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I spoke to Erin at HarperCollins, who, first conversation, she said, I want you to go there. And I was like, where? Like, I'm exactly where I need to be, lying. And she's like, no, I feel like there's just something else. And I want to be able to get there with you. And I liked the way that she approached it. I was still planning on lying to her, but I liked what she said. But she was the best person ultimately, because when I started writing and showing her some of the other stuff I was working on, she said, because it was taking so long for the other one, because it just wasn't a real thing. So of course it's going to take a long time to write it. And I would send her stuff and she was like, it's just so on the surface. You're not, there's nothing there. There's no there. And I was like, oh, okay. And I would send her more things. And one day I started sending her some of the notes and letters that I was writing to my friends and my family. And she said, this is what I knew was in there.
Yeah.
This is what I knew was in there. Let's keep doing this, because it was giving me, like, once I had permission to do that, I was really like cranking it out. And the idea was to give her all of the stuff I was writing, and then she would just be an editor and change the pronouns and vowels and make sure the tenses matched up and all that. But once we looked at it, I remember she called me and she said, whatever this is, keep doing this. And then let me argue with my bosses about why it needs to be just like this. And the fact that she trusted me and trusted herself and trusted that there was something there that I could not see at the time was a game changer. Because even the agent that I had at the time, he didn't see it. He didn't like the book I ended up writing. I don't think he liked the book. He never said he liked it. I ended up getting another agent right before the book started, but it's because I just didn't feel like, he just didn't like it. And that's fine. You don't have to like my book. But if you're going to be my agent, you should like it a little bit. You should maybe tell me you like it. Like, I didn't hear a word from him. Like, he never, to this day, I don't think he's ever said he likes the book. But I had Erin, and Erin, she's the reason the book exists exactly the way it did, because she fought for it and she fought for me and she trusted me even when I didn't trust myself. I needed that. I wrote the exact book that I needed to write. But because of that, I don't ever want to write another book.
Okay, wait, we're going to get into that. But the poetry performance background, and I've had a spoken word poet on the show before, and it totally influenced her style. And in the book, like, you do some repetition that's really beautiful and stuff like that. How did your poetry and performance impact your writing process?
Oh, it was all through it. It was all through it. I don't know any other way to write. Even the quote unquote decision to have these stories / essays, the only thing that we could not get done was getting essays removed from the cover. I really didn't want people to walk in thinking it was like, these pop culture essays,
right.
Or these really, I didn't want that, because I think that even though it's a collection, I think there's a story, a through line there. Mm-hmm. And I think that having it be called essays kind of put this mark on it, or a stamp on it, that I don't think is completely accurate. But I think in those short form writing experiences,
like hook, next verse,
kind of. Yeah, because I again, going back to J. California Cooper, knowing what to say, how to say it, knowing that you're making me remember my book, in the book Like a War, or in the essay Like a War, where it says, I'm in Brooklyn or Chicago, and saying it all those different times is to emphasize the level of confusion, emphasize the lack of stability that I was feeling. And every time I repeated that, I mean, I don't know if it came across, but for me, it meant something different.
Yeah.
It meant something less and less stable. It meant something less and less tangible. It meant something more and more chaotic, and not knowing, she doesn't even know where she is, like physically. She doesn't know what city she's in. How does she know anything else about her life? How does she know anything about what she's feeling or what her partner is feeling? So learning from poetry and learning that there's a shift in ways you can construct the same set of words with different emphasis, knowing how much more of a story you're able to tell by just using the same words over and over again.
So the response was great, right? What was it like on your end?
See, that's the part that's hard for me. That's the part that was very, very difficult for me when it comes to publishing, because I loved my book, and I didn't love it in this, oh, it's the best book in the world. Not that. I poured everything into it. And I wanted so much for the people who worked on it. From a friend of mine did the cover, because the cover that the publishers were giving me, they didn't do it. And this is a friend who was reading the essays before they were published and who knew me pretty well. And they sent me this one cover that I just didn't like. And I'm not a visual person. I'm not a visual artist. So I couldn't even explain why I didn't like it. So I sent him the cover and I said, he's a graphic designer, so give me the words. Tell me, ghostwrite an email for me so I can tell them why I don't like this, because I don't know how to say it. And then also give them what it is that I do want to see. And he said, okay, I'm at work, give me a moment. It took him about 4 hours later. He says, I don't have an email, but I have this. And he sent me a bunch of different mock-ups. And this was one of the one that we ended up with was one of them. I was like, this is perfect. This is perfect.
It's a really
this
good
is
cover.
exactly, I love it. And I loved that he did it and fought for it. Aaron fought for it. Everyone fought for it. And we got it. And I wanted it to win something. I felt like he deserved that because he captured it so perfectly. And I don't think the book would have done as well if it had a different cover, because there's something about it that that tells the truth about what's inside the book, and it's disorienting, and you know when you pick it up that this book, all the things in here are going to be a little bit off kilter, and they're going to be a little bit disorienting, and I wanted him to win something, and Aaron, who saw this book before I did and worked so hard to get it to where it was, and argued with her bosses, and spent so much time reliving her own traumas in order to make sure this book existed the way that it needed to. I wanted her to get something from it. And it went from me being really proud of this book to me being very sad that it wasn't winning awards that I had never heard of until I didn't get them. You know, like I didn't even know what this was. And now I'm not nominated, and I'm very sad about it. And it just turned into this thing where I felt like I was, and it made the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm very grateful.
That's huge.
Let me back up. I'm very grateful for everybody who has read this book, and I'm very grateful for everybody who has written to me and spoken to me. Like what you just said was, thank you so much for that. I am very grateful for every moment that this thing has existed from top to bottom, and everybody that has touched it, and everybody who's liked it or didn't like it, or anyone who just took the time with it. I'm so grateful for that. And I don't like the fact that I still feel like I didn't do enough. And I don't like the fact that I felt like the people who made those decisions didn't see it. And I don't know if they did. I don't know if they did. They may never have even heard of it or seen. There's all sorts of reasons. But the fact that I was getting so upset, and not angry, not like I deserve this, but just like hurt and wounded, that I felt like I sold my mom out. And I felt like I told all these stories of people that maybe I shouldn't have. And then on top of that, I didn't have but you know, it did this thing too. I didn't have that. And I didn't want that, you know, like I didn't want that. I don't want to put myself in a position anymore where I feel like the thing that I create has to be judged.
Right.
I don't even, does that make sense?
No, it's like the toxicity of publishing and how it seeps into writers' brains.
Yeah.
And like I told you at the beginning, it's one of my all-time favorite books.
Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of people feel like that. New York Times bestseller list, like those are, you're right, like the awards we don't care about until we don't get them, right?
Yeah. And it's such a weird thing, because before the book came out, and when it was like on these like most anticipated and, you know, all these things, and I was getting like these people in the industry started following me on Twitter and like talking to me. And it'd been a very long time since I was new to something. And I was new to publishing, and I was new to the book world. It has been a long time since that's happened in anything that I've done. And then as the nominations started coming or not coming, they started talking to me less. And the same people who were like, congratulations, when it was New York Times bestseller, I don't speak to them anymore. And it's not like we were best friends or anything, but it was significant. And I was like, what is this? Why are my feelings hurt? Like, I don't know these people. I don't know them. I wouldn't have known them at all if it was. I wouldn't have known them personally. I would have, of course, known their work. And don't get me wrong, Melissa Phoebos, I have to shout her out, because she was the person who gave me, when I was writing the book, she met me in Brooklyn, just started having a conversation with me, and just really she's just an amazing person. And there's so many amazing people that I'm so grateful for, that I met, these writers that I love, that I never thought I would even be in the same sentence with. And I'm friends with them to this day. And that's the thing that I keep saying, like, there's so many more amazing parts of this. Why am I over here upset about this thing, again, that I had never even heard of, until somebody said, oh, I'm so sorry you didn't get that thing. I'm like, what was it? I didn't get it. Now I'm sad. Like, what? It doesn't make any sense. And I just don't want that for me anymore.
So how are you, moving on to your next project? And like, do you have something concrete planned, or?
Yeah, I've had a lot of careers in my life, just sort of shifted. They're all, revolve around writing and media and stuff like that. But my book was optioned for television.
Ooh.
So yeah, and I'm a big TV fan. I think I love TV more than I love books. The TV taught me how to speak English, and then reading helped me sort of solidify understanding what American life is. And so I love television. And so that was a huge opportunity. And I've been working on that for the past 2.5 years. It's a whole different thing. And that comes with its own set of awards and ratings and things like that. But I think that I'm much better prepared for it in this arena than I was with because it caught me off guard. The book caught me off guard. But you know that there are certain fields. Like, I feel like if I were a real estate agent, I wouldn't be concerned about awards, but they're probably real estate awards, right? You know,
There definitely are. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. And I would probably feel bad if I didn't get one, but that's not what I was doing it for.
Right.
As opposed to like TV, where it's like, I watch the Emmys. I know the Golden Globes. So I know that these things exist, and I'm not going to be blindsided by the existence of them. I don't know why I don't know why it's like the not knowing and then caring that I've held on to for so long. I think I'm really frustrated with myself. Like, you didn't even know it existed. Why are you upset, you weirdo?
I love that. That's honestly just the most human. So, okay, is there another book?
I don't know. I'm not saying yes. If you would have caught me 2 years ago, I've been like, absolutely not. No books. Absolutely not. Now I am, if something comes up,
Okay.
I'll explore it. One thing I do want to do in publishing, and I've been thinking about it for a very long time, is I want to edit an anthology. And I want an anthology of people who don't often get to tell their mental health stories for whatever reason. And it could be, I come from a very wealthy family and we just don't talk about these things. Or it's, I come from a marginalized community and I'm afraid of being labeled or pathologized. Like, I just want, it's less about the story and more about how it's told. And that's something that I've been thinking about in earnest since my book came out, because as much as I appreciate when people tell me that it's the first time they felt like they recognize themselves in stories about this specifically, I don't want it to be the last time. It doesn't need to be me. I don't want it to be me. I don't want to be the person who writes these things all the time, but I do want other people to tell the story better than I did, better than I could. And I want to be encouraging of that, because I think that one of the things that I did learn is to make room and to make space and to scoot over a little bit. And I think that's a large part of it too. I did what I needed to do for myself, and I did what I needed to do for this book. And all the things that I fought for, I think that when people told me to fight for it, because it might be your only book, they weren't expecting me to take that literally. But I think I took it literally. And now I want to see what comes next and who else is telling it, because I read Willow Weep for Me by Namama Dankwa. I read that when I was in college, and that was the first book by a Black woman documenting her life with depression that I'd ever read. And then 20 years later, I can think of maybe a couple of more. And 20 years from now, I don't even want it to be like a question of, I can't think of one. Because I want them everywhere. And it's happening. And I just want to be encouraging of that. I never feel like I have to be the one, but I do want to be, if I can, because I'm a New York Times bestseller. If that has any cachet at all, I hope it gets other people telling stories in these weird ways, like non-linear, out of the pocket, like written in wingdings.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I always ask everyone, what's on your bucket list? Is that it?
I don't know if it's on my bucket list.
What is on your bucket list?
I think Oprah's on my bucket list. I don't know why.
I loved the Oprah mentions when you're like losing your shit and you're like trying to conjure up Oprah. Those are like some of my favorite moments in the book. That is so funny.
And it's all, I remember watching her. I know that her favorite things episodes weren't supposed to be a manic obsession or a manic dream manual, because I was like, oh, I must have everything that she mentioned, everything. I would love for her to read it. it. I don't know if she probably has it, but I would love for her to read it. Like, I think she's my bucket list. Like, her book club, that's the only thing I knew about, didn't get, and I wanted. And I was like, oh, that's sad. I would write another book just to get on Oprah's book club. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the wrap up questions. I mean, is there anything else that I should ask you about?
No, I don't think so. I first, before we move on, I just want to thank you for this. I was very hesitant, as you know. I also kind of feel like I don't like telling the same story over and over again. If you've done one podcast, you've done them all. But I feel like in this conversation, I feel like I was in therapy, remembering things and recalling things that I hadn't even thought of. So you're an amazing interviewer and conversationalist. So thank you for having me, and thank you for insisting that I did have something to say, because I think that often when you say, oh no, I don't want to do it for these reasons, we're like, okay, and they move on. And you were like, I think you do, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so what piece of writing advice do you wish you could give your former self?
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah.
There are so many things that I've written and I threw away or deleted because it just wasn't good enough for me. And I was not the person who should have made that decision. And I think I was very, very hard on myself because I didn't trust the fact that I was a writer for way too long. And I think I would tell my younger self to save the thing. And it may not be important right now, but it'll come up at some point. The book, some of the things that are in there, I had to dig through Google documents because I remember a sentence or a line that I wrote down for whatever reason. And a couple years ago, I probably would have deleted it or forgotten all about it. But there are lines in that I remembered that fit right here. And I didn't know where they were before. And I can't think of all the countless things I deleted that could have could have been a whole other book.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's such a good one. I am a pack rat of like notes, even physical pieces of paper and stuff, but I'm like, no, to my boyfriend, like, this is important.
It's all important. It's all, you know what's funny? I have like these journals that I kept when I was in college. I think I started in like high school and college, and then my first couple of years in New York, I had all these journals. And you would think I would go back and read them for this book, but I opened one of them and I was immediately mortified by a thing that happened sophomore year of college. And I refused to open any of them. So I don't know what's in there. All those journals could be like, oh, this is a totally different story. Like, none of this happened in your book. Like, this is what actually happened. But then I also had, when I was flipping through some of them and not reading them, I had like pieces of paper that I had printed out, that I had glued over something that I wrote.
Oh,
and
that's so interesting.
Right. And in the book, I talk about, editing things as they happen because I wanted to remember them different. And I physically did that in journals. And that's something for my therapist and I did to dig into. But yeah.
Amazing. Okay. One tip for a writer trying to get a book published.
Trust yourself. Trust yourself, trust your voice, trust yourself, trust your voice, but listen. I think that often we get into the trust yourself and you think that everything goes, but there are people who see things differently, who are able to add some and help you chisel away at what you're actually trying to say. But then also don't trust them so much that you forget your voice. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your all-time favorite piece of your own writing? This?
It's actually not that. I love that, but it's not that. I wrote a series of poems a couple years ago. I called it the Broken Diva series. And there were poems about Phyllis Hyman, Amy Winehouse, Britney Spears, Whitney Houston, Lauryn Hill. And of course, I was writing about these women, but I was also writing about myself, and especially Britney and Phyllis both lived with bipolar 2 disorder. Amy, I think, had depression and anxiety. some of the others, I'm not going to speculate, but I could see pieces of myself in the things that they were experiencing. And I think more so than my book, those 5 or 6 poems tell the story as well. There's a line in the Britney Spears poem that goes, if my tears were toxic enough to kill, you would sell tickets to my suicide. Because it's called A Letter from Britney Spears to the Paparazzi. So there's certain elements of like all the poems that like speak to things that were important to me that I needed to like feel for myself as a woman, as a Black woman, as a performer, as a fairly public person. And I think that those poems, those are my favorite.
Bassey has generously offered to let me run some poems from the Broken Diva series, so make sure you are subscribed to the Bleeders Substack for more. It's thebleeders.substack.com, or you can find the link in the episode description.
Oh my God, this has been so amazing. That is all. How can people like connect with you? And you're on Twitter. I follow you.
Oh, do you? Message me so I can follow you back. I am on Twitter and I don't know, Instagram. I'm Bassey World everywhere. I have a website that I don't update, BasseyIkpi.com, but there's a form there if you want to, get in contact. Like, that's how you got in contact with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm around doing things, primarily a soccer mom right now, but...
Oh, we didn't even get into mom writing stuff. You'll have to come back for your next book.
Okay, relax.
Okay,
slow down.
Well, whatever. The TV show.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Bleeders. Writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak. Last name is Kocak on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack for all kinds of newsletter exclusives. There's so much good stuff that I send out to my free list, and I actually just launched a paid subscription with some extra goodies where I take you behind the scenes of all my best bylines. I published a post about my return to stand-up comedy and how I got ready to crush my showcase. I wrote about MFAs and whether or not I think it is worth it. I also did one of my favorite workshops I've ever taught. It's a manifestation workshop that I did for the new year, but it's really good any time of the year. So there's so much good stuff for free subscribers and even more for paid subscribers. And there is a link in the description for that. And join me again next time for another all-new episode. In the meantime, happy bleeding!